So friends, there is absolutely nothing like your kid asking you, what is my new last name gonna be? And well, who's gonna walk me down the aisle at my wedding? Tough questions to get when you are in the midst of a divorce, and questions that still linger when you are trying to figure out co-parenting. And I want to remind you that co-parenting is not a worksheet. It is not a course. It is not somebody you follow or an influencer on Instagram. This is your actual life, right? It's not just something you can check off and call done. And we're going to talk about the real stuff. We're going to talk about the court documents. We're going to talk about the group chats. We're going to talk about the new partners, the holidays, and how you build a good life anyways. And I want you to know that if all you did today was keep your kids fed and not cuss out your co-parent, you're doing better than you think. Okay, you're doing better than you think. And y'all, this is a solo episode of the Tell Me More podcast with Nicole Walters. Let's talk about co-parenting. Now, first things first, I want you to know, if you are listening and you are new to this whole thing, I am the mama of 3 adopted girls, ages 26, 23, and 14. And I recently had a biological baby who is now 10 months old. And that means I am a mama of 4 incredible daughters. And I am so grateful and so blessed. But I'm also a divorcee and recently remarried. So I have really done all of the life. My family is a hodgepodge of crazy, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But that also means that I've had to navigate a lot. And in this past season of the Tell Me More podcast, we've talked a lot about what's happening in the world globally, how it's affecting us at home. We've talked about people's different experiences within their life and how they're engaging in everything. But I haven't given y'all an update outside of talking about being a new mama and, how we're managing the relationship. But let's keep it real. Outside all of this, I'm my own person. And also earmuff episode, just in case the kids are there. Earmuffs for the littles and headphones for you because like I said, I'm 41 and I had a baby unmedicated. She keeps it all the way real and there may be an F-bomb. So just keeping it real. Now that you've had a second to make that adjustment, shit is fucked up. Okay, co-parenting is up. Now, I thought I had it complex until I got into that group chat with the girlies and I found out that I actually got it good. Why do I have it good? Because I don't co-parent. Plot twist, number one question I get from everyone when they're looking at my life online, they're seeing how present, my husband Alex is, and they see how engaged and how much the girls are thriving and bonding and just the fact that we're all doing it. And they're recognizing that it looks a lot different, right, from what they saw in the past. And it's that I don't co-parent, right? We don't have a co-parenting relationship. We don't have any engagement. I haven't spoken to my ex outside of a courtroom or court documents or lawyers in years. And, while my ex-husband on paper is the legal father of my adopted girls, and I say that just because I have a biological daughter now, but not because I see them as separate. These are all my daughters, but my adopted daughters I share with my ex-husband, and he does not contribute in any way, financially, medically, in any way, shape, or form to my kiddos. And we do have a visitation arrangement that was what he asked for by his design, but he has not taken a single day of that. And so that is the truth of that. Now, I will say, I will not even venture to guess what the reason is for that because I've done my part, and that's all that matters. And I think that's kind of lesson number 1 of co-parenting. So for those of you who have said to yourself, because I do get a lot of messages from people saying, well, I want to get divorced, but what about the kids? Or I feel like a divorce might be happening, but what about the babies? And I have to let you know, firstly, caveat, I am not an attorney. I am not a therapist. I am a mom who sat across from lawyers, who read court orders, and I still had to pack snacks for tennis tourneys. I still had to deal with, the day-to-day of all the things happening. And all I can tell you is from my experience. So that's why I wanted to start with that, because I have not had to navigate, what does drop-off look like? I've heard horror stories. Some of you are living them, of having to meet off of highway gas stations, just because you could would not go to each other's home to do the kid exchange. Like I've heard, situations where sometimes a step parent does the drop off because things are so tense between partners. And I have to let you know, I think that maybe that's the first thing that I kind of thought of was like, okay, maybe we're on a tension spectrum, right? And the tension spectrum looks like if it's real, real, real bad, you don't even engage. Maybe that's what it looks like. But, along the way, you kind of figure it out. But I used to think co-parenting was for people who failed at marriage, right? If your marriage didn't work, you have to co-parent. That's the byproduct of it. But now I realize that real co-parenting is for people who refuse to fail their kids, because you divorce your partner, you don't divorce your children. And I think that's where it's such a mixed bag for me, because on some levels, when I look at what, particularly my 14-year-old now, who had her father, my ex-husband, since she was 3, when I look at how she's growing up and the fact that she hasn't seen him in literal years, by choice, like not by her choice, but by choice. On some levels, I feel really sad about it. But when I also think about, some of the reasons that I chose to file for divorce and some of the things that I'm, aware of, and she obviously, that's the other part too, is because my kids are older, each of them has their own independent relationship and experience with my ex. And that's something I always try to honor and respect, because they are old enough to speak up about how they feel about that. So even as a mother who can only encourage, only, try to facilitate, only say things like, hey, these are the dates that they're available for therapy. Do you want to do therapy? Like, I can't make anything happen and I can't force anything to happen, because there's also the trauma associated with that, right? But all that being said, it's such a mixed bag, because on some levels, I don't want my daughter to experience things that I know were difficult for me, that may still exist in that emotional relationship. But then on the other side, I also worry about the long-term impact, because father figures are so important. And, I just know that at, 10 and 12 and 14, you aren't necessarily thinking about the daddy issues that you may end up with later, because you don't have a healthy relationship with the person who raised you for so long. Now, I will say I also am blessed, because the person I'm married to is every bit of a father. My current husband, Alex, I think is redefining, not just transparently what my girls are seeing, but also what I thought being a father was. Because if you read my book, Nothing is Missing, that I had a tense relationship with my dad, which dictated a lot of my dating decision choices, and Alex is the first man I've ever selected to date after extensive therapy and extensive work. And that is, it shows. Therapy works, y'all. Prayer works, because he is a good ass man. And I see that in how he, without fail, has stepped in. And even when we met, he understood how important it was that if you've listened to some of our previous chats where he's actually been here on the podcast, he's mentioned that I kind of went off on him, when we first got together, because I was on set. I'll just tell you guys the story in case you missed it. I was on set and I'd asked him to call Allie. At the time she was, I want to say 10, maybe 11, 10 going on 11. And I was on set because of time zones in LA filming a TV show. And she, I always used to call her before bed just to make sure she was good. And we were, separated at the time. She was, living in a home, living with her dad, during that time frame. Obviously, I'm filming on set. And I had him call and he was like, oh, I'll do it. I'll take care of it. It's no problem. I'll do that call for you, because they had a cool relationship. And I was like, hey, if you're not going to be able to do this, I really need you to just like not play around. Like, I will step off set. I will whatever I have to do to make sure I can make this call, because I don't play about my kids. And he was like, no, I got it. I got you. Like, I want to be there for you. I got it. No problem. Don't worry about it. Y'all, he missed that call. This is the first and last time he has ever let down that girl in his life. Like, I'm telling you, in years, he does not let her down. He does not play with her. And I'm not kidding. I reamed him out. I lost it. And I will say I lost it also on a level of I don't play about my kids. And everyone who knows me knows this. And I think any mom, right? We're all like this. And I lost it on him. And he told me, he was like, I was like, is she going to take me out? Like he knew, and he said it recalibrated for him that, it's not just, I'm doing a solid by the woman I'm dating, but she will murder me for her kids. It's that serious. And so they need to be every bit of my kids as well. And ever since then, when I tell you, he's the one who is always on time for bus pickup. He is the one who is, at the back to school night if I can't make it. And even if I can make it, we are at the back to school night. He doesn't miss plays. He doesn't miss shows. He's taken her out on the weekend to play tennis. They have their own like sort of relationship, which is like authority figure big brother vibes. Like I don't know how to explain it, but it's just really special because when Father's Day came and Allie gave him a card and said, you're really earning the title of dad. She wrote that in there. And he cried, because he's putting in that work. And when I see her going like through these steps with him and experiencing it and recognizing that one thing we don't have to navigate is co-parenting. And I don't know how that affects things. I know some of y'all listening are therapists and, everyone has different relationships, but, I'm trying to be transparent about the fact that I know my situation is not like a lot of people. And I'm super, super blessed to have these elements of there's no gap in a father figure. And there's someone she can talk to about the guys at school and someone to cheer her on and to set a standard for what her male experience should be like, and she's seeing her mother loved well and respected and cared for. And he doesn't treat her any different than he treats Josie and, our newest little one. And he has his own relationship with the older girls and they literally call him when they need something. They're like, hey, Alex, we need this. Can you help? Like they have a whole conversation I'm not even part of. They plot, it's like, it's so great. And I'm just so grateful. But I also recognize, and he said this to me, and this is part of why this is today's topic, is he was talking about it earlier and he was like, honestly, like it's a little easier that your ex is not in the picture. It makes it a lot easier because I don't have to fight the real dad, conversation because there's no dad, and I don't have to worry about, matching up or setting a standard. Now, I will say Alex is so mature. When we first started dating and I told him I wanted you to meet my ex because I just want everything to be above board and I'd like to set the tone because truth moment in my brain, we were going to be like Demi Moore and Bruce Willis. Like in my head, co-parenting was going to look like, oh my gosh, like my ex is still going to come to like cookouts and we're all going to vacation together and we're going to hang out. And it's so crazy. And I don't know if I've ever said this before, but divorce is this weird thing where you're obviously not with that person because there's an incompatibility issue. And there are obviously probably inflection points that occurred in the marriage, in the relationship that are not just untenable and unbearable, but just make you downright angry. Y'all, I have those. That is the truth. I have points in my marriage that I know other people, if they heard about them or read about them or knew about them, their jaws would drop because it is outrageous that I even tolerated that stuff. And I'm still pissed about some of that stuff to this day. Like that's real life. Like pissed isn't like, why'd I even let myself receive that treatment because so much worthier, than that. But I also, had these kids, in this relationship with this person who, there are elements of them that I'm like, especially with time, I'm like, oh, that was like adorable, or like, even if this is someone I shouldn't be married to or somebody who I don't know if I necessarily be friends with, like I still respect like humans, right? I still respect people, and there are elements, where I'm just like, man, I just really wish we could get along for the sake of the kids, and when I tell you, for me, because my kids are such a priority in my life, I just never thought that anyone, not just my partner, wouldn't be able to keep it together for the kids. Like I just never thought that. And I think a lot of us maybe know that, which is why we avoid getting divorced, as soon as we should, or we worry, about like what the outcome is going to be. And I can honestly say that that's it, right? Like you can love God, you can go to therapy, you can have a new husband, and you can still get a petty text from your ex that will send you. Okay. It will send you. Like, it's just like, it's such a weird dynamic, but I'm not kidding when I said I really thought that we would be great. I thought we'd be able to have brunches and call and have each other's back. I think that was the thing that also was shocking is like, the kids aren't a burden to me, right? So like having me have the kids wasn't like something where it was like, ha ha ha, you get the kids. Like it wasn't like, I was like, yay, I love my babies. Like, this is great. Like, so that wasn't what I don't think it was the flex that I thought it was, that they thought it was going to be, like, and it just is bummed out because I guess I'm just bummed out because I also think our kids are so cool that it makes me sad that we don't even co-parent, and so, the things that I'm learning, right? Like, and these are a couple of shifts that I really want you to have. They're co-parenting shifts that have really, really, really saved my sanity, right? The first one is my job is to parent, right? Not manage my co-parenting narrative. And I don't know if you know this, but in Georgia, the state of Georgia, you have to take as part of the divorce process when kids are involved, a class. And the class is like several hours. So everyone's taking it. I took it, my ex took it, and it's all about co-parenting. It's about what is visitation? Like it's very like low level. What is visitation? How do we deal with decision making? Like what are the rules in your house? What are the rules in my house? How do we navigate conflict? What's right for the kids? So anyone who has ever been divorced in Georgia, anyone, doesn't matter how famous you are, how rich you are, whatever, right, had to take a co-parenting class as part of the divorce process. So for anyone to say they don't know how to co-parent, like we all have to take a class, right? And one of the elements of the class, which I've absorbed not just here, but in all elements of my life, is your job is to parent, right? You don't have to manage their narrative. So you can never control what your ex or even in their household will say, do, post, anything. Like a healthy person knows that, right? So all you can control, right, are your reactions, right? So like, how do you react to what has happened? So for instance, my daughters have independent relationships with my ex or lack thereof, right? But whatever relationship they're cultivating or decide to cultivate, whether now or in the future, is their own, right? And so when my daughter gets a text from my ex and has a feeling or an emotion about that, I can't control what my ex sends or what my ex will do. But what I can do is control my reaction to it. And that's really important because I don't want to ever damage or impede or even impose on their relationship. So it's important that I react in a way that leaves room for my daughter to have her own emotions. It leaves room for her to reflect on it and see what it means. It leaves room for her to be able to evolve in her approach to whatever the messaging was, so that way, if she's mad right now, maybe she'll feel better later. Maybe some of it's like teen stuff, reaction, like whatever it is, right? But that's been a big thing in our house. If for some reason, we probably get like a text a year, maybe, or like one or two a year. And whenever those come in, there's definitely like, a shift, right? And so when that happens, it's just really important to know that what we can control is our reaction to that, to make sure it's supportive and helpful and nurturing and keeps her in a space where she's able to thrive. That's my little one. My eldest children don't have any interaction, right? The next one is I can also control the environment in my home. So everything I'm saying here is just general co-parenting shifts that I think are really powerful. So I've heard from my girlfriends in their group chats that whenever they do co-parenting, the kids come home and it is like a nightmare. Like that is, when I say a nightmare, I mean, it is like recalibrating. I know some of y'all are nodding right now and God bless you, right? It is recalibrating. It is like clothing is missing, food ain't right, kids haven't slept, sugar hopped up, like, or they're angry and frustrated and mad, like or there's trauma and triggers and fights and, just like it can be a lot. Now, granted, this is, it's not a monolith. I know some people have experiences where the kids go and they come back and it is just wonderful, right? They're refreshed, they're happy, they had a good time with dad and they're just excited to come back home to mom, like whatever. But I can tell you that one of the lessons I know is that, the environment in my home matters. So whatever interactions, because we do still have a visitation arrangement, the only thing I can do is make sure that my daughter always knows that her home her primary home, that she lives in will always be a place of peace. It'll always be a place of restoration, and it'll always be her base camp for comfort, for safety, for nurturing, for, any needs that she has. We can do our very best to meet them in our home. And as someone who is fully financially responsible, for my kiddos and, doesn't even get a dollar, don't even get a stick of gum, it's important for you that my daughter knows that, nothing is missing, and that everything is here. And then the last thing that I know I control is the way I speak about my ex to my kids and around my kids. And, it's interesting because I had a lot of practice with this in advance. So when it came to, the fact that my daughters, I had to interact with their biological mother. I call her my baby mama, and she's still very much in their lives. We still talk to her. She's still around. She still visits. But I've had, at this point, a decade of interaction with someone who may make choices that I don't align with, who may have a home, that is run in a way that's different from the way that I run my home. And someone that I was co-parenting with before, and co-parenting meaning she was still in my kiddos' lives, even if I was the primary parent. And so because I already had that dynamic, I employ a lot of those skills with my ex. We're not going to, we call my baby mama, right? My kid's bio mom, we call her mommy, and then I'm mom. So I'm not going to talk badly about mommy, I might say, mommy used bad drugs, or mommy, makes choices that can make it really difficult for her to parent, or mommy needed a lot of help with parenting, or, there may have been some choices that mommy made that were really different from the ones I made, but mommy, comes from a different space, and maybe looks at the world differently than I do. And I apply the same thing with my ex. When it comes to my kiddos, it's really important to me to make sure that they understand one of the early languages we used. And I say we meaning because Alex also supports this, and Alex also has a tap out rule. If he ever feels like I'm too frustrated or that I might seem too triggered, he taps me out to make sure I'm not slipping into languaging that could be potentially harmful now or in the future in their relationship, because it just isn't worth it. But one of the languagings we used early on was, look, the reason why part of why we're getting divorced is that, dad speaks Japanese and mama speaks English, right? And so you might speak English, so you feel like you understand me a little better, but, we're not getting along because we're looking at our approaches differently, right? So dad's just speaking a different language. And because of that, you may not understand his motivations or why he does what he does or some of his approaches. And, as you get older and you are increasingly certain about the world and, where you fit and what your values are and what your morals are, you'll be able to square that up in a way that works well for you. But in the meantime, it pretty much just comes down to that. It's not that mom's better or dad is worse per se. It's just that right now you may understand, me a little better. I may just do a better job speaking your language, and that really helped, I think, to keep it from feeling like me versus them, but more maybe we just click more, And, one of the things that I knew helped her understand better was when I settled down with Alex, and Alex, very much is a part of our family, my kiddo said, yeah, it seems like you guys just speak the same language. And that's true. And that's why we're together. And so it's interesting because it's not easy, but it's a shift that I found. If I focus on the parenting, it just keeps me from losing it, And then the other thing also is that I focus on stability, right? Stability over keeping a scoreboard. So here's what I mean by scoreboard thinking, right? So scoreboard thinking is and I will tell you, and let me just keep it all the way real. I get pissed sometimes. The other day I was buying grapes and I got so mad because grapes are I don't know about it, where you are, but in LA, they're $15, right? When you talk about something per pound, they're $15. And I recognize that I am financially blessed. I recognize that I have right now, but no one comes out of divorce richer. I gave up so much for my freedom. And I was willing to do it because I did not want to be married to that person anymore, And so in divorce, it's not uncommon, particularly if you're the breadwinner, for there to be a financial energy of I want to punish you by taking everything you have. I want to punish you by making sure that, like I'm financially secure and you are not, and what's interesting is it's important to recognize that one, I think just for anyone who's hearing this right now and kind of going through this process that may be the breadwinner or may be worried about finances, if you're a person who made the money, you can make the money again. You know what I mean? And even if you can't, like your peace of mind doesn't have a price tag on it. And that was something I had to really hold on to was that, even if this is a situation where out of anger I'm being punished because of, I don't want to be married anymore or whatever, like it's just one of those things where the money doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I just wanted my babies. I wanted my babies and I wanted peace of mind and I wanted freedom and I wanted happiness and joy by my terms and my definition. And I wanted to be married to someone who wanted to be married to me. And so that was what mattered to me. But it also meant that, again, I'm fully financially responsible, for 4 babies. Yes, I have a new husband who absolutely helps, pays bills around the house, all of that. But, 4 babies is a lot of kids. And I don't get any financial help. And so scoreboard thinking, like it happens. And it's like when you start thinking, who gets more time with the kids? Obviously, I get all of the time, but I sometimes think to myself, gosh, what would it look like for me to have summers off? What would it look like for instead of me paying for summer camp, my daughter was able to go to, the East Coast and visit family out there and, someone to help with the parenting and have other experiences? Or what would it look like to get help paying for her extra activities because she's showing an aptitude in tennis? And, it'd be really nice to be able to have those extra funds for other things because I was getting help with this, and how sometimes you get into like, who pays for what? Well, I pay for everything, like it's like when you think about like she needs braces now. And I'm like, my gosh, like, she has an actual father who doesn't do it, who doesn't pay anything, and when you think about stuff like that, that scoreboard thinking can eat you up. And it doesn't matter one way or another because it doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't change anything. What you have to start thinking is stability thinking, right? Not scoreboard thinking, but stability thinking. Is your kid emotionally steady? Yes, I have a thriving, happy, mentally sound, generous, kind 14-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old who is navigating the world and doing great, a 26-year-old who is going to be another discussion because I have not gone into what it's like having an older child in rehab and recovery. Conversation for another day. But, my kids are good. Are my kids fed? Yes. Are they loved? Yes. It doesn't matter where the parenting is coming from at the end of the day. It's that my kids are getting what they need. And when I tell you they have an abundance of love, and I'm thankful for that. They've got their bio mom, they've got Alex, they've got me, they've got internet aunties. They are loved and blessed. So I'm grateful for that. Another example is like, I hear about people saying like, oh, I have to give up the holidays. And, the closest I got to this was my 23-year-old was dating her first big boyfriend relationship. And I had to split holidays with his mama, right? Like, which was the craziest thing. It was like, because they were going places together as boyfriend, girlfriend. So it was like, they spent Christmas with me, they spent Thanksgiving there, then we swap next year. And I was like, this is crazy, right? But the reality is, what matters most is that the kids' lives aren't stressful, that they're happy, and that they have a good holiday. And whether that's happening with me or someplace else doesn't matter, And so I'm just trying to remind myself that I can't build a peaceful home or a peaceful life if I am doing mental math over legalities and partnership and, equivalencies and things like that. I am always coming out ahead if my kids are loved and cared for and happy and fed and well, right? And then the last part, of course, this is like the last big shift practicality that helped me is like, look, boundaries are not war. They're not war. So, if I have to communicate with my ex or if there's any communication, granted, I choose to communicate through our lawyers, when required, because that seems the easiest, but when you respond, like you get to choose when that happens. So a lot of us, I think sometimes, out of emotion will respond quickly via text message. I definitely stopped doing that. I stopped doing that during the divorce process, like early on, because I was like, this is not coming from a good place. Like, I don't like the me. And this is, I meant to say this earlier. This is something that is a rule within our home around how we deal with people that we may feel we have emotional conflict with or struggle or trauma or previous experiences that were not positive. We always say, what type of person do we want to be in that relationship? So that ties into this boundary and communication part is, will this response be delivered in a way that is reflective of me being my best self? Like, can I, like, forget how they respond and forget, what they may deserve based on what they said or how they've showed up or whatever. Will I like me? So if the person is someone who hasn't so much as sent you a birthday card, and then they're like, what about my birthday or something icky like that? You can decide if you want to say happy birthday to them. You can decide if you want to send them a message or a card, regardless of how they treat you, because is that who you are as a person? And raising my kids like that has been, when I tell you, like, I do not think I'm a perfect mom. I do not think I give perfect parenting advice. Like, I'm telling you all this, I'm just speaking from my experience, but that is something I will pat myself on the back for, because my kids are fucking awesome. Okay. Because they go out in this world and they treat people well. They are kind. And when I tell you what they've experienced, in how others have treated them, unwarranted, they could go out and be raging bitches to everybody and cuss everyone out. And listen, I wouldn't blame them. I would not blame them. And instead they say, who do I want to be and how do I want to show up? So part of that is, when do I respond? A rule we have in our house is, do you need to sleep on it? My 14-year-old will get text messages from people that frustrate her, and she will literally say, I am so mad about this. I need to sleep. This is so inappropriate. I need to sleep on it. It is her instant reaction to say, I don't need to respond right away. And that is a big part about learning boundaries that I think has been empowering for her. We've also learned what conversations, especially within co-parenting or within relationships with tough people, are text message, what things are for email, and what things are for lawyers. Okay. Not everything is for you to respond to. Don't be relying on ChatGPT to give you a cute little sentence. Some stuff needs to be the lawyers, right? And then the other thing is no late night fights, right? We do not sleep on a tone of negativity. So there have been some times where I have seen a change in my baby's, I say baby, she's 14, but in my baby's energy, related to co-parenting issues and, things like that. And we got to recalibrate. We call it a palate cleanser, where we literally have to be like, okay, let's get out and go for a walk. Let's go get a cone, of ice cream. Let's watch a funny movie. Let's, play Just Dance or a video game or a board game. We've had to do a palate cleanser to just sort of clean the slate of energy, because we will not go to bed on that note. And I got to tell you, those rules around when to respond, what topics are for text, email, lawyers, no late night energies, that stuff has really, really helped. And those were all tools I would use in co-parenting as well, if that was something I engaged, because I do think it would help for that, and ultimately, like, messages about the kids and logistics would be totally fine. You know what I mean? Like, that would be where I would stand. I found that for my friends who are engaged in co-parenting, that's what works best for them. I will tell you, it's hard to find the words when you're emotional. And I just know that there are lots of life situations that are tough. One thing that I do is, like, let's say that you're getting a tough phone call, is I'll say to myself, look, this interaction is 10 minutes. My kids are watching me, like, just breathe. Right. And to my kids, it's like, I love you, have a great day. I'm sorry that you had to face, things that were hard for you today, but know that I'm always here. And I'm excited that you get to have time with your friends, with Alex, with people that love you, just really using languaging that's like affirming of their reality, even if at times it feels like elements of it don't look the way they are, while also making sure that you don't like inadvertently gaslight their feelings. You don't want to invalidate that, they may not be excited about co-parenting, or they may not be excited about having to talk to someone, or they may not be excited about certain things. We just want to be clear. You have to remember that you can still be a good mom and grieve the family that you thought you would have. Because when it comes to co-parenting, it's not a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. So even though I'm not engaging with my ex, as a father to my kids on a daily basis or at all, it doesn't mean that it's not on my mind that at any given point, he does have visitation rights, if he ever chooses to utilize them. And I do have a 14-year-old that is growing and changing and has been away from that father for so long, and I always need to be prepared for her. And it's not easy when, I'm a Christian, that's my practice. And divorce is something that, can feel so churny within Christianity, because humans have ascribed a lot of things to it, but Lord knows in my marriage, we were divorced, because there are obligations of a husband and obligation of a wife that were not being fulfilled. So that divorce, before it was earthly paper, was already happening in a spiritual way. But, one thing that I know about my faith is that God was not surprised by this divorce. He was not surprised by this arrangement. And no matter what, he is in my kids' future, and he is in my healing, and nothing is missing from their story either. So I just want you to imagine a future, right? I want you to imagine a future, and this is one that I think about, where my kids will be adults, and they'll have their own table. And I want them to be able to say that my parents may not have been perfect, but I know that I was loved. And I know I'm not responsible for their mess. And that to me is the win. I used to pray that my marriage would survive. I used to. And now I just pray that my kids will thrive regardless of the choices of the adults in their life. And I'm grateful we have new adults in our life that, are helping them affirm better choices. But no matter what, I just pray that they thrive. And those are different prayers, and this one is working. So I just want you to know that if this episode made you feel seen, then you are my people. Okay. I'm proud of you for showing up for your kids and showing up for yourself and doing these really hard things. If you are listening and you're saying to yourself, I haven't quite, I know my marriage is in a churny, weird spot, but I don't really know because this co-parent thing is so fucking weird and I don't want to have to deal with it. I just want to let you know that everything you want is on the other side of a hard choice. So if you want more than a podcast, know that I've got, a list that I keep, the details are below. You can add yourself. I email out more than this. I send out real stories. I send out language sometimes that you can use in conversations, things that I don't share anywhere else. I like to say that my weekly email, I don't even want to call it a newsletter because it's more like a group chat, right? For my internet aunties, for people who are co-parenting, for people who are figuring it out. But this is more of what I send out in those emails. So the link is in the show notes below, so that you can have that. So if you want to continue having these conversations, know that I've talked so much about business, but I'm realizing that a lot of us are in a transitional state, whether it's personally or globally, realizing what's happening in the world. We're transitioning in our beings and our thoughts, and I just want to be there for you. So click that link below and you'll get the emails, the follow-ups, the podcast notes, all of that. And if you're curious about the fuller story, right? Like, how did my marriage fall apart, and how did I bring it back? How was I raised and why did I think it was okay? And, but how did I build the business, or how did I hit the goals, or how did I end up with these kids? Just know that I wrote out that whole thing. You don't have to listen to the whole podcast for that, but the story of how my family came together, fell apart, then came together again is in my book, Nothing is Missing. And it's on shelves everywhere. The books are sold, and it'll keep you company on the nights that you can't sleep and that your mind is kind of wondering, what does hope look like, even with the mess in between? And I always want to let you know, you can send this to a friend who's in the thick of co-parenting, a friend who, feels like they're kind of alone in the frustration, so they know that this isn't just them. And I want you all to know that no matter what, no matter where you are in this season, you are not failing. You are not failing. You are doing one of the hardest jobs in the world, and I'm cheering for you. I love you, and I'll talk to you more soon.